concept of extinction seems pretty straightforward. An animal disappears. Scientists search for it, find nothing, and eventually label it extinct, case closed. But in reality, it doesn't always work like that, as nature occasionally has the helpful habit of tearing up our metaphorical paperwork. Officially, we generally report animals as being extinct when there's no reasonable doubt that the last individual has died, basically meaning there are no known living individuals anywhere on Earth. But that known part does quite the heavy lifting here, because despite our satellites, sensors, and selfie sticks poking into every corner of the planet, our knowledge has gaps the size of continents. Literally. I mean, we've barely mapped 20% of the ocean floor. And then when you add on the fact that half the time we can't even find our own car keys, even when they're sitting in plain sight, well, imagine just how challenging finding the last surviving member of a species is. So that's all to say that even when we declare an animal to be extinct, there's a chance that it actually still lives. Few animals blur this line like the Tasmanian tiger, scientifically known as Thylacynus cynocephalus, once native to Tasmania, mainland Australia, and New Guinea. The Tasmanian tiger was declared extinct in 1936 following a devastating combination: habitat destruction, disease, and most tragically, a government bounty scheme that paid hunters for every tiger killed. But this wasn't just any predator disappearing into the mist of extinction. This was the erasure of an animal that had survived for millions of years as the world's largest carnivorous marsupial. The thylacine was truly unique. A dog-like creature with tiger stripes across its back, a stiff tail, and the ability to open its jaws to an absolutely terrifying 120 degrees. To put that into perspective, lions can only manage about 65 degrees. This animal could literally unhinge its jaw like something out of a nightmare. And yet, despite this fearsome appearance, historical accounts describe them as rather shy and cautious around humans, even timid. What made this animal even more remarkable was its evolutionary distinctness. The thylacine represented an entire family. Thylacinidae, with no close living relatives. It was the last of its kind in every sense. Carrying millions of years of unique evolutionary history on its striped shoulders, males stood about 58 centimeters or 23 inches at the shoulder, similar in size to a medium dog, with females being slightly smaller. But it is this elusive nature that might have theoretically helped it avoid complete extermination. Potentially, because while it has been declared extinct since 1936, when the last known individual, named Benjamin, died in Hobart Zoo, there have been literally thousands of reported sightings that have emerged from the remote wilderness of Tasmania. And these aren't just campfire stories told by tourists who've had too much wine. One of the most compelling examples occurred in 1982 when park ranger Hans Narding was conducting spotlight surveys in the northwest of Tasmania. At 2 a.m., his flashlight beam landed on an animal that stopped him dead in his tracks. For 3 full minutes, he observed what he later described in meticulous detail: dog-like face, stiff tail, distinctive stripes. Narding was no amateur. He was a trained wildlife professional who knew the local fauna intimately. His official report remains one of the most credible eyewitness accounts on record. And then there's the physical evidence. In 2016, researchers found what appeared to be thylacine scat in northern Tasmania. While DNA analysis couldn't definitively confirm the species due to degradation, the samples contained unique markers that didn't match any known Tasmanian carnivore. Moreover, in 2019, footage emerged from a trail camera showing a dog-like animal with an unusually stiff gait and what appeared to be faint striping. Wildlife experts remain divided, with some insisting it's merely a mangy fox, while others argue the proportions and movement patterns don't match any known species on the island. However, despite all these tantalizing clues, I will say that significant doubt still persists among experts, with the main problem being this: if a breeding population of thylacines truly existed, we'd expect more than just fleeting glimpses. We'd expect roadkills, clear photographs, undeniable DNA evidence. Tasmania, after all, is only 68,000 square kilometers, not the Amazon rainforest. And with modern trail cameras now saturating the wilderness, the continued absence of definitive proof grows more damning each year. But considering that potential evidence has extended up until 2019, more than 80 years after its declared extinction, this does point to at least the possibility that the Tasmanian tiger still might be prowling through those misty eucalyptus forests. And until we can get more concrete evidence of its presence, the thylacine remains suspended in that curious limbo between confirmed extinction and possible survival. But while the Tasmanian tiger might be playing hide-and-seek in island forests, another apex predator is possibly engaging in an even more impressive vanishing and potential reappearing act, all the while in one of the most extensively surveyed mountain ranges on Earth. So, in other words, in a place where hiding spots should be virtually impossible. So picture this, the fog-shrouded peaks of the Himalayas, where prayer flags flutter in thin air and snow leopards prowl the heights. But somewhere in those same mountains, an even rarer cat might still be stalking through the shadows. And this isn't the setup for a fantasy novel, but rather the real-life mystery of the Kashmir Mountain Cat, or Felis shawiana. First described in 1842 by British naturalist Thomas Hutton from a single skin obtained in Kashmir. This enigmatic feline vanished from scientific record almost immediately. The Kashmir Mountain Cat was described as being larger than a domestic cat, with thick, luxurious fur marked by distinctive spots and stripes, perfectly adapted for high-altitude life. But here's where things get fascinating. Many zoologists believe it might not have been a separate species at all, but rather a rare color morph or regional variant of another cat species. And yet, for over 180 years, no one has definitively proven what it was. But unlike many extinction stories involving habitat loss or hunting, this was a case of something far stranger, an animal that was never properly understood in the first place. You see, the Kashmir Mountain Cat was described from a single specimen, examined briefly, then lost to history. No photographs exist, no museum specimens survive, just written descriptions and sketches that leave modern scientists scratching their heads. But thankfully, nature seemed to have some differing opinions, as despite the lack of official evidence. Local shepherds and villagers in Kashmir and neighboring regions have consistently reported encounters with unusual cats in the mountains. Cats that don't quite match the known species. Not quite a jungle cat, not quite a Pallas's cat, but something in between. And then in 2021, something very interesting happened. A wildlife camera in the high valleys of Kashmir captured footage of what appeared to be an unusually large, heavily spotted wildcat at an elevation where no known species typically ventures. The footage was brief, less than 5 seconds, but it reignited interest in this forgotten feline. And this wasn't just some blurry figure in the distance. The animal displayed proportions that didn't match the region's known wildcats. The only problem is that experts remain divided on whether this represents a genuinely distinct species, an unknown population of an existing species, or simply unusual individual variation. So honestly, the verdict is still out. But each new sighting seems to suggest that something unusual is definitely prowling those mountains. And if it has survived in complete scientific obscurity for nearly 2 centuries, that would be a true testament to just how much we still don't know about our own planet. But sometimes an animal doesn't just go extinct, it transcends into legend. And such is the case with Campephalus principalis, also known as the Ivory-billed Woodpecker, a bird so magnificent it earned the nickname the Lord God Bird. And why? You ask. Well, because when people spotted one, their first reaction was reportedly to exclaim, "Lord God, what a bird." A little cheesy, but true. Once the largest woodpecker in North America, it inhabited the bottomland hardwood forests of the southeastern United States, and at roughly 20 inches long with a wingspan of nearly 3 feet. This was no ordinary backyard woodpecker. Being essentially the T-Rex of the woodpecker world, it had a massive ivory-colored bill, hence the name, which it would use to literally tear chunks of bark off trees like you would peel an orange. And this wasn't just for show, as its formidable bill allowed it to access beetle larvae tunnels that no other birds in its range could reach, giving it essentially a monopoly on a very high protein food source. It also had very striking black and white plumage that, combined with its ivory bill and size, made it quite unmistakable and very recognizable. Well, recognizable until it wasn't, mainly because it wasn't there anymore. The ivory bill's decline was swift and brutal, with logging, hunting, and habitat destruction driving it to the brink of extinction by the early 20th century. But it was still alive. And in 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt himself reported seeing 3 of these birds during a bear hunting trip in Louisiana, a presidential endorsement which sadly did not save the species. By the 1920s, some ornithologists already thought they were long gone. However, they did manage to persevere for a bit longer, and a team managed to find a very small population of them in a little area within an old-growth forest in Louisiana called the Singer Tract. This was the last group of ivory-billed woodpeckers ever found in the U.S., and unfortunately, this old-growth forest was owned by logging companies bent on cutting it down. But in an act of desperation, a nonprofit known as the National Audubon Society made a remarkable bid to buy the logging rights so that these birds could live. However, in typical human fashion, the bid was rejected and the forest logged into destruction. The last universally accepted sighting in the U.S. occurred in this very tract in 1944, when artist Don Eckleberry documented a lone female in the remnants of this once proud forest, which was now on its very last legs, and for the next 6 decades, this bird existed somewhat in a scientific limbo, neither conclusively extinct nor definitively alive, with sightings sometimes being reported, but often turning out to be the similar pileated woodpecker. However, there were a number of compelling finds, including potential photographs as well as even feathers that were conclusively found to be from the ivory-billed woodpecker. But then, in 2004, something crazy happened. A 4-second video was recorded that seemingly showed a large woodpecker with the exact same field markings as the ivory-billed woodpecker. And the footage was so convincing that a paper was even published in the prestigious journal Science, claiming that it was in fact our extinct friend. But seeing that this elusive bird had been last conclusively spotted nearly 60 years prior, the claim understandably led to quite the backlash, with the birding world fracturing into 2 camps. The believers and the skeptics, each accusing the other of wishful thinking or scientific negligence. And the controversy wasn't just academic, it also had real-world consequences. For example, the town of Brinkley in Arkansas, which was near where the sightings occurred, experienced a 30% increase in tourism. They even hosted the Call of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker celebration, which came complete with merch, woodpecker haircuts, and ivory-bill burgers, whatever that means. And in the midst of all this debate, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to make their own investigation and end the argument once and for all. And after analyzing the video, they came to a conclusion that this was, in fact, our extinct, not so extinct bird. Unfortunately, though, since then, nothing as conclusive has really come out. And in 2021, without strong evidence of their continued survival, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service attempted to resettle the matter by proposing to officially declare the bird extinct once and for all. But let's just say that did not go over too well, with the public reaction being intense, to say the least, with thousands submitting testimonies and purported evidence of recent sightings, which forced the agency to push back their decision for further review. And as of 2025, the bird remains officially critically endangered, possibly extinct, which is a pretty bureaucratic way of saying we have no idea. But I will mention that many ornithologists remain very, very skeptical, with one even pointing out the hypocrisy of there being incredibly rare birds that live in the middle of the Amazon, and yet people can somehow get good identifiable photographs of them. But then on the flip side, people in the US spent hundreds of thousands of hours trying to find and photograph the ivory-billed woodpecker without conclusive success, which ended with him concluding that if there really was a population out there, it's almost inconceivable that no one could get a good picture of them. But here's the thing about extinction. Sometimes we just don't want to believe it. The ivory-billed woodpecker has somewhat become more than a bird, kind of morphing into a feathered Bigfoot of the swamps, a creature that represents both our guilt about environmental destruction and our desperate hope for redemption. So whether it still exists or not almost seems beside the point. The legend, the summer in the deep forests of the American South, this magnificent creature still hammers away at ancient trees, has taken on a life of its own. Now, with all this said, hope is not lost for animals that even have conclusively gone extinct, as demonstrated by the Pyrenean Ibex, also known as Capra pyrenaica, or locally known as bucardo, and representing one of science's most profound interventions in the extinction process to date. This wild mountain goat once roamed the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France. Males displayed distinctive black markings on their necks and forequarters, with both sexes having curved horns, all features that had evolved over countless millennia. But by the 20th century, relentless hunting and competition with domestic livestock had reduced their numbers dramatically, from thousands of individuals roaming freely across the mountains to a population that never exceeded 40 by 1910, all confined to a small corner of Spain's Ordesa National Park. This decline continued until the last known individual, a female named Celia, was found dead in 2000, and get this, killed by a fallen tree. It was a comically tragic end for an entire subspecies. One moment peacefully grazing, the next becoming the final entry in an evolutionary line millions of years old. And to make matters worse, the Portuguese ibex, a related subspecies, had already disappeared a century earlier, making the loss of the Pyrenean ibex just that much more tragic. But, as it turns out, Celia's death wasn't actually the end, as scientists had collected tissue samples before she died, thus preserving her genetic material. And in a groundbreaking experiment, researchers attempted something previously confined to science fiction, bringing an extinct species back to life through cloning, Using nuclear transfer techniques, they placed Celia's DNA into a goat egg cell whose own nucleus had been removed. And this was not an easy procedure, as out of the 285 reconstructed embryos, only 54 of them were viable enough to transfer into surrogate mothers. And of those 54, only a single one developed to term. And on July 30th, 2003, a cloned Pyrenean Ibex was born, marking the first extinct animal ever resurrected through human technology. And for one brief moment, extinction had been reversed. But unfortunately, the triumph was tragically short-lived, as the newborn ibex died minutes after birth due to severe lung defects, a common problem in early cloning attempts, but nevertheless, this marked a profound milestone in scientific history. The first de-extinction event ever, and also making the Pyrenean ibex the only species to have gone extinct twice. Maybe not the best accomplishment, but it did set the precedent that what's gone can come back. And perhaps with more companies like Colossal Biosciences making some headway there, even though that's not exactly the same process, we might be able to expect the real de-extinction of long-gone animals. But as our other stories prove, sometimes what we call extinction is just nature's way of saying you weren't looking hard enough.